Could shock comes from a pattern that investigators quietly acknowledge but rarely say aloud. In inquiries meant to expose truth, witnesses often become the most vulnerable people in the room. In the months surrounding the Madlanga Commission, insiders whispered that fear, not evidence, was shaping what people were willing to say. When Witness D finally spoke, it wasn't the volume of his claims that stunned observers, but how calmly he described what he believed was a coordinated effort to make evidence disappear in plain sight. That calmness made the room colder because it suggested preparation, not impulse, and it suggested that whatever he was describing had lived inside the system for a long time. What followed was never supposed to happen in public. The testimony was meant to be one piece among many, weighed, tested, challenged. Instead, it landed like a stone in still water. Witness D described alleged police actions that didn't just bend procedure, but appeared to redirect it, turning internal safeguards into shields. He spoke of dockets that stalled without explanation, of instructions that came verbally rather than in writing, and of a culture where asking too many questions marked you as a problem. The implication was unsettling. The system designed to investigate crime might also know how to hide it. As the commission progressed, attention shifted from what was said to who was listening. Lawyers leaned forward, commissioners asked carefully worded follow-ups, and journalists began comparing timelines. Witness D's account seemed to intersect with other testimonies in subtle ways, not through identical details but through shared absences. Names not written down, meetings not minuted, decisions justified after the fact. Inquiries thrive on paper, and yet here was a story about paper trails that thinned out exactly where accountability should have thickened. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere reportedly changed. Sources later claimed that Witness D grew uneasy, not because his evidence was being challenged, but because of the silence that followed it. No formal rebuttal, no immediate disciplinary moves, just a sense that the system had absorbed the shock and was waiting. In environments like that, waiting can be more frightening than confrontation because it suggests calculation. Those close to the process began to ask whether the commission had exposed a truth, or merely revealed how difficult truth is to act on. 8 threads began to dominate conversations among observers. First was the idea that cover-ups rarely look dramatic, they look bureaucratic, wrapped in procedure and delay. Second was the role of hierarchy, where responsibility diffuses upward until no single hand appears to hold the pen. Third was the vulnerability of witnesses who operate without visible protection once the cameras turn away. Fourth was the question of motive, whether the alleged actions were about shielding individuals, institutions, or reputations. Fifth was timing, because the alleged irregularities seemed to cluster around politically sensitive moments. Sixth was credibility, as supporters and critics of Witness D each claimed the mantle of reason. Seventh was fear, spreading quietly through lower ranks who watched what happened next. And eighth was precedent, because everyone understood that how this case ended would shape who dares to speak in the future. As weeks passed, speculation hardened into concern. Witness D reportedly altered routines, limited movements, and spoke less freely, a common response when someone believes attention has turned dangerous. The commission, meanwhile, continued its work, bound by mandate and process, unable to act on every perceived risk. This gap between legal procedure and human vulnerability became the story beneath the story. Truth had been aired, but safety had not been guaranteed. Then came the event that reframed everything. Witness D was killed in what authorities described as a targeted attack, an act that immediately ignited public outrage and competing narratives. For some, it was proof that he had been telling the truth. For others, it was a tragic coincidence seized upon by rumor. Official statements urged restraint, emphasizing that investigations were ongoing and motives unconfirmed. But the damage was already done. In the public mind, the line between testimony and consequence had been violently drawn. The next 8 currents pulled the narrative in darker directions. One was the speed with which speculation outpaced verified facts. Another was the pressure on investigators to prove independence in a case touching law enforcement itself. A third was the chilling effect on other potential witnesses, some of whom reportedly reconsidered cooperating. A fourth was the politicization of grief, as factions used the death to advance broader arguments. A fifth was the media's role in amplifying partial information. A sixth was the Commission's dilemma, how to proceed when a witness becomes a symbol. A seventh was institutional defensiveness, visible in carefully crafted language. And an eighth was public trust, eroding not because of one allegation, but because of accumulated doubt. 2 deeper questions emerged that refused to settle. Was the system capable of investigating itself when allegations pointed inward? And could any future witness reasonably believe that telling the truth would not cost them their life? These questions hovered over every subsequent hearing, every procedural ruling, every delayed report. They were not legal questions alone, they were moral ones, and they demanded answers beyond courtrooms. It is a moment of reckoning where institutions are judged not only by findings, but by what they protect along the way. Witness D's testimony and his death forced the country to confront an uncomfortable possibility, that exposing wrongdoing may still be more dangerous than committing it. Whether that possibility becomes a permanent reality depends on what happens next, in investigations, in reforms, and in the quiet decisions of people watching from the edges, deciding whether silence feels safer than truth.